Ask a Career Coach. Um, we will be discussing rocking your behavioral interview today with our career coach, Christine Horstman. We are so glad to have her today, and she will have another session with us next month as well. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Christine. We will be taking questions at the end. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I'll keep track, and we'll have some time for questions and discussion. All right. Thanks, Christine.
Great, wonderful. Thank you all. I'm happy to be here with everyone. Again, I'm Christine Horstman. I am a certified professional coach, a certified career coach, and a professional development instructor. And today I know, there's so many pieces about the job search that can be a little bit nerve-wracking and put us out of our comfort zone. Interviewing, obviously, we want the job. It's easy to feel a little bit nervous. I think that hopefully this technique of the STAR method will help you formulate your answers in a way that gives you greater confidence going through the interviewing process. So we're going to pull this apart for you here today. Whoops, a little too fast there. Okay, so we're focused on the type of interviewing called behavioral interviewing. This is a very common format for interviewing. The idea is that past performance proves future ability. And there are other kinds of straight traditional interview questions, some of which you will be asked too, where they're just more specific, especially if it's about hard skills, your general career arc, basic questions. But behavioral interviewing questions, you'll know you're dealing with behavioral interviewing questions because they're going to start with, tell me about a time when. Can you describe a scenario where? Walk me through a time you had to. Okay, so they're going to always have this idea of you're telling them about a time, describing a past experience, and they're going to be heavily correlated with soft skills. So here's an example. Tell me about a time when you had to do you had too many things to do and you had to prioritize your tasks. This is some variation of this is a very common time management behavioral interviewing question. The way to handle behavioral interviewing questions is with the STAR method. And STAR method is an acronym for the situation, the task, action, and result. So it's just a quick and easy format for how you're going to format your answer. And then in our last session that I was with you, and we were talking about refreshing our resume, I said, think stars and stats. So using the STAR sort of formula when you're writing your bullet points for your resume, but also the stats. So always we're trying to show quantifiable results, right? To where people, you don't just say, I was great at sales, you're giving them actual, I increased sales 50% over a 2-year time period. I grew the region from 2 states to 5, right? We're giving them quantifiable, tangible results. So that's why I say think stars and stats. Even when you're using the STAR formula, I want you to think this idea of quantifiable results in your answer as well. So we're going to go through each of these individually, but basically it's the situation, the task, the action, and the result is the formula that you're going to be working with. Okay, so situation. We want to set the scene and share any complexities of the scenario that we're describing. Set the stage for what they asked you about the time management or customer service. Tell me about a time you had to deal with an angry customer, right? So when I was working retail, it was Christmas peak. It was 2 days before Christmas Day. We had a record number of people in the store, right? Okay, there were 20 people deep at the cash wrap. Okay, so set the scene. You don't have to belabor it, but give them an idea of the complexity of the situation that you were dealing with. Share details, but basically you're just trying to provide context for the story that you're going to tell them. And then you're going to go to tasks. describing the task you had to complete, the problem you had to resolve, and what your role was. So the goal here is you're starting to demonstrate your competencies through defined problem solving. So we set the stage with the situation. Now we're explaining here was the problem, the challenge, and what your role was in it. So I was the manager on duty that day. When the customer was getting angry, I was the first person to speak with them. Were there other teammates involved? Again, give a little bit of a detail to explain the challenge, the problem, the task, and your role in it. Then we're going to go into the action, explaining what you did. How did you handle it, right? So this is where you're showcasing your ability to make things happen. You're showcasing, I do have this skill. I've set the stage. I've explained what the issue was with the task. And now I'm going to tell you the action. Now I'm starting to verify through the storytelling technique that yes, I have the ability to handle difficult customers, or yes, I have proven good time management skills. So just simply explaining what you did, how you resolved it. And then finally, the action and then the results. So the outcome of your efforts. Describe and validate. Again, this is where the stats piece comes in. Describe and validate the actual results that you achieved. I was able to pull her to the side of the line. I opened up a second wrap so that everybody waiting in line had less of a wait time. I thanked everyone. I pulled her aside, said, I'm the manager. What seems to be the problem? How can I help you? I found out what she was upset about. I was able to offer her a refund. It was 2 days outside of our refund policy, but given how long she had waited, given that it was Christmas, she's a regular shopper, I recognized her. I was happy to give her the refund and make an exception. And I also gave her a coupon so that she could come back in the new year when it was quieter to shop again. Okay. And she was so happy. She thanked me profusely. And sure enough, she came back for our January sale and continues to be a loyal customer. Okay. So describe what you did and the results achieved. Sometimes, like in sales, you'll have actual numeric numbers, the stats to validate what you did. You'll have savings. You saved the company or the customer time and money, right? So savings, achievement in terms of results, like we're talking about with sales and statistics, or it's going to be more in this anecdotal way of that I'm saying with this customer service example. She came back in to shop. She continues to shop with us to this day. We ended up getting a great review from the same person on Yelp. I know that she was satisfied with the outcome. She called and thanked my manager. So it might be a little bit more anecdotal, but it's a result that you can demonstrate through someone else's actions or feedback. My boss praised me for the way I handled the difficult conversation. I got great feedback from the rest of the staff, etc. Okay, so share the results in a way that really validates the action that you took and shows positive outcomes. Sometimes you'll get a question that's going to talk about, is there ever a time you failed on some degree, right? You weren't able to give the customer what they wanted. You weren't able to meet a deadline. They want to know how you handle frustration, failure, setback, problems, right? So there might be a time where you're talking about something that was a negative or you weren't able to achieve the desired results. Our team had a sales goal of 120, 20% over last year's goal. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make it. It was a team goal. We each had an individual part in the team goal. Here's what mine was. Here's how we worked together to try and achieve the goal. Despite our best effort of working extra hours, coming up with some new incentives for the customers, we still fell short by 5%. But given that it was the pandemic, we felt very positive about the outcome. And I know that the CEO was satisfied because we all received an email thanking us for our hard work and that was still very pleased with the end results, even though we fell short a little bit. Okay, so you were going to admit that there was a problem, admit a result you couldn't happen, but you're going to still put a positive on it. Lessons learned, again, other results achieved, other positive outcomes. So if you've got a negative, think lessons learned as the way to end it on a positive. Okay, so tips to preparing for these behavioral interviews and thinking of these stories. What I want you to do is to make a list of your top accomplishments. I recommend this, just thinking about doing kind of that assessment. You're thinking about a different career. You're thinking about what are your transferable skills. You're trying to refresh the resume like we've talked about. Making a list of your top accomplishments, some of which might be outside of the professional realm. It might be a volunteer or civic experience. If you're a student who's going to be graduating, it might be something, extracurricular or team sports or something of that nature. It could be, a random marathon, but you're going for sales, but you're showing determination by running a marathon. It's a goal I set for myself. Here's how I broke it down. Here's how I achieved it. Here's how I motivated myself, right? So you can broaden it outside of your professional experience, but remember you're wanting to tie it into your professional experience and this job that you're looking for, and the skills and soft skills and accomplishments that would be interesting and applicable to this particular company and role. But start with a broad list of your top accomplishments. Think of, the stories you tell about, oh my gosh, remember the time when you're talking with your colleagues and peers. Think of the stories. And then what I want you to do is review the job descriptions requirements and the key competencies that you listed on your resume. And now start to go back to that list of accomplishments, top stories professionally, and say, okay, which ones might start to match up as proof of this skill? I also want, as you're doing your research, to look over the company's website, to look at their core values and identify what those core values are, because those are going to be the other things that they're likely to ask you about in the interview. So, if their core value is excellent customer service, if their core values value, integrity, whatever the case may be, expect there are probably going to be some behavioral interview questions geared towards not just the soft skills in the job description, but also those values of the company or department, depending on how large of an organization. So once you've sort of done your top list, you've reviewed the job description, you've looked at your resume again for what are you saying you're really known for professionally, what are you saying you accomplished, and I have these skills. Then what I want you to do is look at each of those competencies and values and Google them. And so put in behavioral interviewing and time management, behavioral interviewing and sales skills, behavioral interviewing and leadership, right? And you'll start to get sample interview questions that you can use to prepare from. And from those sample interview questions, I want you to look at the list of stories, the list of your top accomplishments, and try to answer them using those stories formatted into the STAR format, into the STAR technique. And that's how you do it. There's not a simple way to do this. It really does take preparation and thought and practice. The name of my company is Paper Doll Communication. And one of the reasons it's named that is because I really believe in the power of putting things on paper. You need to actually sit and write out some of these answers. You could do it in a bulleted format, but really to think through, have I hit situation, action, situation, task, action, result. Am I hitting all 4 points of those? Because they're all important for setting the story and setting the stage and proving you have the skill. So I want you to really sit down and go through these and prepare them. And the more you start to do it, the easier it is. You'll see there's one key accomplishment, one of your top stories of your professional development that you can actually use to answer 3 or 4 of these different skills, depending on the way you set up the scenario and you focus your answers. So it's not like for every single one of these, you need a whole new story, but you need at least probably 10 or 12 of them in order to answer an interview and not be using the same example over and over again. But you will see them, as I said, the more that you practice, the more you're able to use a story and pivot and put it into a different core competency that they ask you about. Okay, so again, when we're talking about these work victories, your top 10 successes, as I mentioned, think about everyday examples from your work, not just necessarily all the really big ones, but some of the types of situations you encountered over and over again. But think of one concrete example that is demonstrative of something you did or happens all the time. And again, that you want to tie back to the resume so that you're reinforcing what you've said on your resume. And as I mentioned, you want to be looking for some that are kind of versatile to where you can use those stories for different soft skills and different interviews as you start to prepare and prep. Having difficulties today. Okay, so I want to give you this example where if you were to Google behavioral interviewing, look at sort of formatted examples, you will see some examples that don't really fit the bill. And so I wanted to show you one and why. And this comes from an answer on Live Career. And this is sort of like community sourced answer. So it's not necessarily coming from a career development professional. So it's close, but not quite. So you'll see here, the behavioral interviewing question is, what would you do if the work of a subordinate or team member was not up to expectations? Okay. The sample response. Luckily, I have quite a bit of previous team experience and have faced this situation a few times in the past. In my experience, the most important first step in dealing with an underperforming subordinate or team member is honest communication. I find that talking with a person can lead to some surprising discoveries. For example, that the person didn't understand the assigned task, or discovering that the team member is overwhelmed by the assignment. Once I discovered the problem, I could then usually find a solution that allowed the work to move forward. So often in situations like this, the problem is some combination of miscommunications and unrealistic expectations. This isn't like it's a horrible answer. The problem is it shows me she knows how to talk about the situation. It doesn't prove to me in concrete terms an exact scenario where she did this to where I can actually imagine her doing it. And I believe everything she's saying when she talks about it in an overview, generalized kind of a way, which is why people ask behavioral interviewing questions. So the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. You could start out general like this. You know, this has come up. I've been a team leader at 3 different organizations at this point. So this has come up several times. And what I found in general is, and say everything that's in this sample here. But then I want you to take it a step further and give the STAR format answer. So what I want you to do is you can tee it up with this general answer, but then I want you to say, for example, you know, when I heard the question, I automatically thought of a woman on my team at IBM, where this was starting. First, it happened once we spoke, it was turning into an ongoing issue. Set up the entire situation. Again, situation, task, action, result. And so you talk about it in general terms where you're demonstrating, I've had this experience multiple times, and then you give the one concrete scenario. For example, one such situation comes to mind right now. Okay, and you delineate it in very concrete terms. This will make you a stronger candidate, I promise. So when you're looking at the job description, this is for a call center supervisor. This is what I'm talking about when you start to go through and highlight what are the key core responsibilities and skills. So responsible for direct daily supervision. I can expect a question like that last one, right? About have you ever had to deal with someone who wasn't performing well? Other types of supervision, motivation, leadership type questions. Participation in the hiring process, provision of guidance and direction to staff, which kind of falls under direct supervision, schedule preparation and management. So scheduling, which is going to also be some time management probably in there. Hiring process, what experience do you have with hiring, interviewing, which part of the hiring process? Adherence to standard operating procedures. So there's going to be questions about procedures, staff training, problem solving, follow-up, performance monitoring, and evaluation. Some of these overlap. So these are the different words where I would put in problem solving and behavioral interviewing questions. Procedures, behavioral interviewing questions. So this is how I want you to go through to break it down. And here's just an example where I put in behavioral interviewing questions for problem solving. And once you start to dig, you'll find some different samples. And you can see, tell me about a situation where you had to solve a difficult problem. What did you do? What was the outcome? Describe a situation in which you recognize a potential problem as an opportunity. What steps do you follow to study a problem? Okay, and obviously these are just the highlights, and then you would go in and look at them. If you can find a scenario in your top stories and your top accomplishments to answer one version of this with the problem solving, even if it's worded slightly different or a slightly different angle, you'll be much more prepared to slightly fine tune your answer in the moment. So again, the more of these you write out in practice, the stronger you're going to feel on the spot in the actual interview. So here's an example for the performance monitoring and evaluation of a couple different questions. Share an example of how you were able to motivate a coworker, your peers, or your team. Tell me about a time when you felt like a good leader. Describe a time you had to provide training or coaching to different staff members on the same tasks, okay? So you'll start to get your wheels turning and you'll start to outline your answers based on your stories and the STAR format. What I also want you to think about in general when you start practicing this, so let's say you don't have any interviews in the pipeline at the moment, but you're feeling so inspired after today. You can do this based on your resume. You can do this obviously based on jobs you're applying for. But the other thing to think about is some of the broad soft skills that most companies are looking for. And these are the top 5 in-demand soft skills based on LinkedIn does a survey every year. Most of these, I think actually every one of these was in, possibly not one, it may have been communication versus emotional intelligence, but at least 4 of these were in the top 5 last year as well. So these are other good ones to think that like there's a good possibility these are going to come up in a lot of interviews. You can also think broad categories as you're starting to think through your stories and situations that you would use, thinking through what your accomplishments, general categories for behavioral interviewing that are often touched on: teamwork, problem solving, what I've grouped as initiative, leadership, motivation. You may not be being hired as a manager or a leadership position, but still people value an individual's ability to show leadership traits, motivate and self-start, right? So put those in one category, if you will. Communication and interpersonal skills, that's the emotional intelligence, honestly. And then how do you handle challenge, stress, pressure, and time management / organization, right? Do you have your act together? Can you handle the workload, etc.? Are you organized? Okay, I'm going to just run through a couple other basic interview prep tips based on a couple of the questions that came up in our last session together. And a couple people did put a few things into the chat. So I'm going to go over a couple of them, and then we should have plenty of time at the end to answer other questions that y'all have. So how should I dress for an interview? And I really took this to mean, most interviews are still going to be over Zoom right now. And I want you to think of, even though in general, like even myself, I'm dressed more casually than I would for like another professional event today with the way my schedule is today. But I want you to think of dressing the same way you would as an in-person interview, even if it's online over Zoom or Teams or some other kind of video format. You want to show up as your best professional self. You would rather be overdressed than underdressed, but you also want to get some sort of feel for the company and the industry. So a marketing agency might be more business casual, even more casual than business casual than, say, a bank, right? So, but always err on the side of a little bit on the more professional end. Absolutely business casual, which would be a collared shirt for a guy, preferably a tie. I think showing up with a suit jacket might feel a little much for most industries over Zoom. But again, some of the more conservative industries, no one is going to fault you for overdressing to an interview. They will fault you for sure for underdressing. So err on the side of that. But for men, for sure, a collared shirt. Make sure you're not wrinkled. You know, even though you're not in person with someone, some of that stuff still translates over video. So hair done, all of it. Honestly, I would be dressed from head to toe for an interview, even if it was over Zoom. You will feel more on point, more alert, more pulled together if you've got your dress shoes on as well. Do not, you know, go dressed up on the top in pajama pants, yoga pants, whatever on the bottom. Something could happen and you have to stand up. There have even been employers that ask people to stand up because they want to see, like, they kind of want to test for this. How seriously are you taking this? Are you coming with your best self? How would you handle it if it was a client, right? So don't think that because it's Zoom, you only have to worry about from the top up. Things can happen and you may have to stand up. You know, something could fall over, you have to adjust the lighting, whatever the case may be. Something could happen in the moment. So dress professionally. This business that I've got going on today, I wouldn't do for an interview. I wouldn't do anything that's like big, dangly, potentially noisy or distracting in terms of jewelry or colors. Think about what your backdrop is going to be when you're also picking your colors for your interview. Whereas in person, we tend to tell people, like, tone it down a little bit, like don't walk in with the bright fuchsia top or something. We tend to have people err on the side of more neutrals and tone down when we advise for interview dress. But over Zoom, we want to make sure that there's a little bit more energy coming through the camera, and a brighter color sometimes translates better over video. But again, like where I've got a strong blue background, I'm going to go with maybe more of a neutral top. So think of what your background is going to be for video interviewing as well. Okay, one of the other questions is best questions to ask the hiring manager. So you need to come prepared with at least 3 questions. One should be about something that shows you've done some of your homework on the company, the product, the industry, to where you're asking an informed question so that you show that you've done your homework, right? But don't ask a question that could have been answered on the website because that will backfire. Ask a question that shows you've done your homework, you're digging in deeper, you're invested, you're interested, and kind of going next level. You can also ask, it's a great question to ask, you know, how has the economic impact with COVID been on your business? You know, here's what I've heard about the industry, curious what's happening with your business. You could ask them how the pandemic has impacted. Are they still working remotely if that hasn't come up? You know, what is your plan for that? How do you see that impacting the way you work together in the future? I think you should ask some questions that get down to communication style, personality style, management style. When we go on an interview, especially in initial interviews, but sometimes even when you're 2 and 3 deep in the interviewing process, people are on their best behavior. It's sort of like dating. At the beginning, you're trying to get to know each other, but everyone's bringing their best self, of course. But we also want to know, okay, what's underneath? What's the real other parts of you? So I would ask, you know, how would your staff describe your management style? So that you can get down to that communication and personality pieces. How would you describe your personality style? So that you can really figure out if you're the right fit for this. Another good question is, if it hasn't been touched on, what would be the expectation for the first 90 days? You know, where would you expect someone to be in this role by the first 90 days and then say the first 6 months? So that you kind of gauge how that your performance is going to be measured. You get an idea, is this like a sink or swim culture? How much support will there be? Where is that bar set? So those are some of the types of questions that I would ask. So I would ask one that are getting down to work teams, management style, communication, work environment, so that you're starting to understand the culture. And then I would also ask a question, as I said, that demonstrates you've done your homework and you're really invested and interested. And then you can have a third that can be a little bit more generic. Always an easy, after you've asked some really good questions, to ask questions about, you know, next steps. Is there anything else that I can clarify for you? Is there anything you feel that I haven't fully addressed that you're concerned about? What made you successful in this organization? Why is the role open? What did the past person do well? Why did they leave? So that you also understand what you're stepping into. Has there been a lot of turnover in this role? So that you can gauge some of those pieces as well. So I really would have at a minimum 3 questions. Again, I think if you can brainstorm sort of your 3 generic questions in general that fit sort of almost any of the interview, and then try to come up with 3 that are very specific to that interview, you'll feel very well prepared for asking some questions. Video interview reminders was the other thing I wanted to mention. Lighting is so important when you're over video. Ring lights, you can get cheap ring lights that are like the little round lights that clip on the top of your computer screen. Even the larger ring lights aren't that expensive, but the little ones, you know, for 20, 30 bucks, you can get a Lume Cube or a ring light that will make a big difference. But even just balancing the lights around your room, if you can have natural light facing you, that's not always possible. But if you can even just take 2 lamps, possibly play with taking the shades off or not on each side of you, play around with the lighting for the time of day that you'll be meeting. Again, people are fairly forgivable right now, but at the same time, we've been doing this for a while in the pandemic, so it's not like the very beginning. Make sure the phone's off, the pets are out of the way and aren't barking. The kids are, you know, again, off and doing their things. You're in a room where you can close the doors. Other things to think about is your internet. So when I do anything over Zoom, I plug directly into my router because it creates a stable connection and you have greater bandwidth. That may not be an option for everyone, but an Ethernet cord, again, is not very expensive. It might be worth it if you're doing a lot of video conference interviews. What I would ask at the beginning is to make sure you have their contact information. If for some reason we have a problem with connection, what would you like me to do? Would you like me to call you on a certain number, or would you call me? I just want to be sure in the event that something were to glitch, what the plan is and what we should do. Okay, so make sure you've got their email address handy. If something happens, you've got to shoot them an email and say, I've lost my connection, or I've lost you. I think your connection dropped, whatever the case is, having trouble. A lot of people do headsets where they plug in. So again, like the noise isn't distracting and they're focused. You need to test your microphone. At some computers, you might need to add in. My microphone on my laptop, because it's older, is not great. So I have like a $15 microphone and it does wonders. So test all these technical pieces. If they're doing a video format you've never used before, practice it. Do your own little mock trial run. If you can record yourself and take a little look at yourself, that is really powerful as well. When I do mock interviews with my clients, I record them so they can watch them later, hear back some of their answers. You can just even record yourself on your phone answering and just see what you sound like in general as you're practicing the STAR format technique. but do a test run is really what I'm saying, and to make sure that all the technical pieces and the lighting and the connection and the quality are solid. The beautiful thing with the video interview is that you can have some cheat sheets around you, right? So if there's a couple of points you want to be sure you hit home, like I want to be sure I mention this success story, want to be sure I mention this past experience because I think they're going to be concerned I don't have enough of, data processing or whatever the case may be, and I want to be sure I hit that home. You can put a little post-it note, on your computer where no one's going to see. You could have a little cheat sheet of a couple of the stories. It's okay to break eye contact for a second. You don't want to look like you're, fumbling through notes or, reading a bunch of stuff, but you can very steadily have a little post-it note, right, for a couple cheat sheet points. What I also want to encourage you is to make sure that you're looking into the camera. You're going to want to spot check and make some contact to see what kind of body language feedback you're getting from them. But generally speaking, you want to be looking into the camera. It's better if it's coming a little bit down at you. No one wants to be looking at someone's nose. No one wants to be looking like too far into, cleavage you'd want to cover anyway, but things of that nature. Be really careful what you look like. White clothing on video can be really washed out, with the exception of when you have like a very strong background or a darker background. Also be careful that something doesn't look see-through, just like in any interview, but do a little test run again on what your interview outfit looks like over video. Okay, so I think that's it, but I think it gives us a good amount of time still for additional questions that people might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine. There was tons of great considerations there. Really excellent ways to gain confidence and interview successfully. So we have some good questions in the chat already. And for anyone who hasn't dropped in a question, if something's coming to mind, just let us know and we can read that out to Christine. So the first one, it says, how long should I take to think when they give me a scenario?
So this is the thing where if you really do this practice of writing out answers, practice saying some of them, and I don't mean to where you have this all memorized. If you start trying to like memorize, they ask me this question, I'm going to say exactly this, you're going to sound not as natural and you're going to actually probably make yourself more nervous because you're like, I didn't say that exactly perfectly, right? So not memorized, but familiar to where it's top of mind. It's okay to pause a second. I used to do tons of hiring. It's partly how I got into this line of work. One of the other reasons why companies use behavioral interviewing is because it helps ensure that your hiring practices are fair, because you're asking everyone the same question and you're gauging, did they demonstrate they have the skill on the same scale? It's okay to take a second to say, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a moment, right? But 30 seconds can feel like a long time to you and the interviewer. So it's okay to pause and think for a moment. It's okay, absolute worst case scenario. This happens, you freeze up, you can't think of a great example. If you cannot think of putting it in the STAR format, do that generic. Is better than not giving any answer. That like the sample that I said, I want you to go further from, but it's okay to pause for a little bit. But if you're like hemming and hawing, it's better to say, I am having trouble thinking of a really great example top of mind. Could we come back to that, right? If you also feel like you finally are like, I still can't think of something great, but I've got to start talking. It's okay at the end to say, when you asked me about the customer service question, for some reason could not think of what was a really good scenario. And I wanted to just come back to that if you don't mind, if we have a couple more minutes, because I've thought of a better one. I think that would give a better example for you for what you're looking for. So it's okay to also come back and readdress if you need to. This is a conversation. The more you sort of think like I'm having a conversation with a human being, the easier it will also feel to you. But it's okay to pause for a little bit. That's why I say the beauty of the video interview is that you could have a couple little cheat sheet reminders that if you kind of get a little bit stuck.
That's great
But
advice.
2 minutes, 3 minutes, it's getting weird.
Yeah, that's too long. The next question I have here says, do you have any advice for someone who wants to apply for a job that they have no experience in? I plan to make a career change from marketing to accounting. These jobs are quite different skill sets.
Yeah. So I think for that one is like a very big career jump that like, and as an accountant, you've got to have baseline hard skills, right? So you're going to make the case through your hard skills and whatever training degrees, certifications that you're doing right now. Maybe you would start in the door, possibly, I don't know, possibly bookkeeping or something that doesn't have quite the same level, but you're going to have to demonstrate that you have that skill somewhere else. So growing up, my family owned a store, and every Saturday morning I went and I did the books for them, right? So you're going to create some sort of career transition story of where, you know, I've been in marketing, but I actually do have the skills. You're going to also have to create the story of why. You know, what led you from marketing to this? What's made you chosen this? You know, could be, I've always thought about it. You know, my parents always said, it's better to do a job like accounting where, you know, you're going to always have work. But I was really attracted to, I don't know, the creative side of marketing. But as I've gotten older, I realized that number crunching side of me, I still have such a strong interest in that. And with COVID and the shift in the landscape in the marketing industry, or whatever the heck your personal reason is, you're going to have to give that career arc story, and it's going to have to make sense. And then you're going to have some skills, whether from the past, volunteer, new credentials, some new other kinds of certifications and training to where you can show it. You're going to also possibly have to be prepared to take a step back to move forward.
Another question, how would you recommend talking about any changing of duties over the course of 2020, for instance?
So like you've lost some duties or been added duties on. I don't know if they can elaborate, but I mean, some people's work has changed. I just did a training and one of the women was in admin. Well, so now she's not sitting in a room where people, you know, she's helping quite in the same way, and she's at home. So the work she's doing right now is a little different. She's not making travel arrangements for people, right? She's not planning the events or setting up the conference room or things of that nature. So now she's doing a lot of filing, database management, a different type of administrative work. So I don't know if that's what they mean, but I think it's, so I guess I need a little bit more about sort of what type of question they're worried about responding to, I guess, or how they're trying to frame that. Because unless it's, you're worried that you can't prove you still have that experience, if you've done it, you have it, right? So even if your duties have shifted, if you've done it, you had it, which is why the behavioral, the STAR format is so important. You prove that you had it. And you speak of it with confidence and concretely, people believe you. But
Jessie, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, okay, yes, that I was going to ask the person who asked it if that was what they needed, and they said, yeah, that was a good answer.
Sorry.
So, yeah, I think, like I know for us here at the library, there have been some roles shifted, and like with the city overall, there were some like different staff allocations to different departments and stuff during like the really hard hitting months of the pandemic. So I wonder if it's a similar situation to that of like those duties being, you know, different in those kind of months as opposed to like regular. Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you, there's a question that used to come up that comes up in a lot of interviews in some shape or form. Can you tell me about a time that you had to go along with a decision you didn't agree with? Okay, so that's a very common question that speaks to, again, people's emotional intelligence, their ability to support like the overarching team or company decisions and goals. Are you a team player? How do you handle frustration and setbacks? It covers a lot of different skills in one question. And so a shift in duties could be a good answer to something like that. Well, with COVID, we had to reassess. We had furloughs, we had less people, we had to take on new tasks. Some of it felt almost like I was being demoted because I was now, the library, I don't know, shelving books and cataloging things that I haven't done since I first started. I'm used to being at the reference librarian desk and handling customer inquiries, but we don't have as many of those in the same format. So while it felt difficult because I felt like I sort of stepped backwards in my responsibilities, I understand that we have to stay productive and focus on doing what we can in the ways that we can right now with the pandemic.
Yeah. That good pivot. Yeah. Yeah. And I've got one more question here in the chat from Daisy. How do you address past jobs where you had negative experiences without being too negative?
Yeah.
Balance.
Generally speaking, you don't need to tell them. What happens to us is that we have a lot of baggage from our experiences, right? We feel bad if we left a job not on good terms, whether we left by our own accord or we were, involuntarily had to leave. We're the one who carry this like emotional baggage and weight about it. No one else knows. So you don't have to introduce it. So when it's talking about, maybe for example, the more straightforward, less behavioral type format where they're like, I see that you were with Motorola for 4 years. Why did you leave? Right? It's kind of that kind of a question I'm thinking that Daisy's thinking of. So you need to think carefully about your why and don't get into the negativity. I was looking for an opportunity where I could make more money. I felt that I had gone as far as I could there. Whatever that next positive why is, put it into that. Sometimes our company was bought out, my manager changed. It was a big shift in the culture. I stayed there for 3 months. I thought maybe I would make it work, but then I started to think to myself, while I could have made it work, it just made me start to reassess. I guess that natural shift and change had me step back and start thinking. And I thought, you know what, I have been here for 5 years. It's time to challenge myself and step out of my comfort zone. So, you can maybe even allude to a tiny piece, but don't go there. Try to stay in the positive. If you get asked specifically, have you ever had a manager you had a difficulty working with, right? That's a little bit different. Right. But again, you're going to put it into lessons learned and positive outcomes. I learned
lessons learned and positive outcomes. That's good.
Right. Positive outcomes.
Yeah. Any other questions, anybody? Lots of great stuff today. Thank you, Christine.
You bet.
For anyone who is finding all of this very helpful, I'm going to plug last week's session with Christine, which was, as we alluded to, resume refresh. And we do have that available recorded online for you to go back and watch. It really ties in well with interviewing and all the things that we're talking about today, because I don't know, I kind of think of the resume as a bit of a worksheet for getting you ready for those questions, because you're thinking about your past experiences and your skills and your selling points. And so I think if you are on that career journey where you are actively interviewing and seeking out places, if you weren't part of last week's session, I would go back and watch that. And after this is all over, I will send out an email with a link to that as well. We have a playlist where you can go back and watch about the past month or so of Dallas Job Seeker Club sessions, so you can see all of these different topics and ways that they can help you in this journey. I don't see any more questions at the moment. If I could just share my screen real quick,
Sure,
Christine, I'm gonna. All right, I'm going to show everybody our website and where you can get some resources from the Dallas Public Library. Just a minute. All right. So this is our job seeker resources page. Here's the rest of the programs that we have in November. We are obviously not meeting on Thanksgiving Day. Please enjoy that time with your family or loved ones. If you click here, it'll take you to our events page where you can get more information. I do also want to say that Christine will be back with us December 3rd. And I believe, let me see, that's today's December 3rd. We'll be going over LinkedIn in depth, which I'm really excited for. Christine has a lot of great tips on LinkedIn so far. So on our website, we have our archive here of past events, all of our recordings. You're welcome to sign up for our newsletter. And then we also have here a bunch of job flyers from local places that are hiring now. So if you're actively looking, this is a great place to start. And our newsletter goes out every Monday, and I always include resources as well as places that are hiring as well. So a lot of great resources. You're always welcome to get in touch with us here at the Job Seeker Center, and we're happy to share the resources that we have with you. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and thank you, Christine, for another great presentation. We really appreciate you. Anything else before we wrap up? All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.